You or someone you love needs help for an addiction. Where do you turn? Foundations Recovery Network offers individualized treatment for the whole person. Our goal goes beyond short-term sobriety. We address substance abuse and co-occurring mental health issues together, providing a firm foundation for long-term recovery. The first step is often the hardest, but we're here with a free assessment, insurance information, and treatment options. Our confidential helpline is available 24/7. So call 877-714-1318 and discover the Foundations Recovery Network difference today.
This is Rich Roll, and you're listening to Sober Guy Radio.
Yo, what's up? Thank you for tuning in today. Thanks to Humans for bringing us in. Thanks to you for supporting the show. Be sure to check us out at thatsoberguy.com for past episodes and for resources. And also, you can connect with us on Instagram at RealThatSoberGuy and at Shane Raymer on Twitter. A couple of announcements before we get to our guest today. We have the first Sober Guy live show coming up September 7th at the Phoenix Theater in Petaluma, California. We have good friend and special guest TJ Woodward. He's the author and creator of Conscious Recovery. So you can go to thephoenixtheater.com to get tickets or thatsoberguy.com. And you can click on the live events tab there and get those, man. It's going to be a good time. Please come out. Check us out, support us, connect with some people. We put this together really to have some fun, help create some community, and talk a little bit of shit too. So we're going to enjoy ourselves. The ladies will be there. The ladies meaning the Jess and Mel. They'll be there to support us, and they've been doing a great job in putting this whole thing together. So much love to them. Let's see. What was our other announcement? I don't even know if I have one. I think I lied to you. So let's just get right to our guest today. Super pumped to have them on today. We got Boston's own father and daughter recovery team, Maegan Kenney and Bobby Kenney. And man, it's an honor to have them on today. Great folks. Maegan, Bobby, it's great to have you. Other than the A's kicking the Boston Red Sox ass in the ALCS this year, what else is going to happen? How you doing?
I was waiting for that.
Yeah. What's up? How are you guys?
We are fantastic, Shane. How are you?
Man,
I'm
thank
doing
you
good
for having us on, Shane. Such a pleasure, man. I'm honored.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I don't remember how long ago. It's definitely been a few months, but you guys were kind enough to feature me on the Addictionary podcast. I appreciate that. We had a really good time. So it really is an honor to have you guys on tonight. And can't wait to hear a little bit about your story, how you guys launched the podcast, and then what's going on and how all that's going.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man.
More power.
Well,
I love it.
Let's kind of start ahead of the game first, like, because your aunt now, Nikki, right, reached out to me months ago when you guys were kind of getting ready to launch, and she just said, hey, we really want to launch this podcast. My crazy niece Maegan came to me with this wild idea. And was like, we're going to do this shit. And I said, well, how the hell are you going to do it? And so, she kind of reached out. I know you guys have some other resources that you leaned on too, but we had a great conversation. I love the tenacity of just saying like, man, we're going to do this. And we don't necessarily know how we're going to do it right off the bat, but let's just go for it. That's kind of the same way that I launched Sober Guy. So I really admired that. And we had a great conversation, and here you guys are. You have this awesome podcast. So take me back a little bit and tell me how this started with you two doing the podcast.
So, first, Shane, thank you for having us on. It's a pleasure. You have a great show, and you're doing great work. And it's awesome to also watch, you grow and connect with people and really make a difference in people's lives who can benefit from this explosion of these recovery podcasts out here right now. And
yeah, it's crazy. There's so many different, platforms coming up. It's awesome.
Yeah. And it's just like, it's crazy, right? Because it's like we can broadcast, I guess, if you want to use that word, to thousands of people if they're tuning in, obviously. And that's the hope. But like, it's also incredibly intimate to be able to listen to somebody's voice every week while you're in your car or while you're, before you go to sleep or, on a train or something like that. So it's these great relationships that people are able to form with one another when we don't even know each other. Yeah. And yet we're able to like really lend our voices and our experiences to the people who haven't really gotten there yet. So it's really been a blessing. And people like you having shows like yours really, helped us kind of come up with the idea. Specifically though, Chris from Dopey Podcast was the person that really kind of like got the ball rolling for me, because, you know, I went to school with Chris. He was in the same clinical psychology doctoral program as me.
Really? See, I didn't know that. That's crazy. I did not know that.
Yeah. And so I met Chris 2 years ago because I had started this opioid crisis and advocacy student group at my school, because I just felt like, being somebody in recovery, I had a certain lens in which I saw the subject. And here I was surrounded by peers getting trained to treat people in a professional setting like me that I didn't really think had the information and the knowledge that they probably needed in order to help people like me. And so I felt the need to kind of put this student group together. And, you know, right when Chris entered the program, he sent me an email and was like, I'm interested in joining the group. And that's how the friendship kicked off. And it wasn't long after that when he told me about his podcast. And I was just like, this is a fucking awesome idea. This is, this is like perfect. This is a way to speak out and speak up, share your story on a platform without really like somebody interrupting you or getting into a battle or an argument, but just really being able to like put your story out there and with the hope that somebody might be able to, you know, connect to it. And so that's really how it started.
Yeah, that's huge. And so how did you become a father and daughter, you know, kind of co-hosting together? I think that part of it is so awesome. Obviously, Bobby, I'm sure you have your own story. Maegan, you have your own story too. And I'd like to get into a little bit of each of those. But how did that kind of come together as far as the podcast is concerned?
She dragged me into it. She literally beat the shit out of me and told me I was going to be working again.
It's kind of funny because I had tossed around a couple different ideas as to who I could potentially have as my co-host.
Yeah.
And really it was just right under my nose the whole time. And it was my dad. And like the reason why that was so important to me was, you know, and we'll get into it in a little bit about our individual stories, but you know, I didn't achieve recovery in a conventional way, and neither did my dad. And I think having him as kind of the model for me that recovery was still possible, despite the fact that, you know, I didn't want to explore Suboxone and methadone. 12-step was too scary for me at the time. AA meetings just petrified me. You know, raising my hand and having to talk about my vulnerabilities and things that I was ashamed of with already, you know, struggling for years with social anxiety was just, it wasn't doable. It wasn't practical. It wasn't feasible. It wasn't going to happen. So I attended a million meetings and could never actually, you know, pick up what they were putting down. And so, you know, instead of me feeling like a failure and like, oh my God, I'm never going to get this, you know, I had my dad as the model of hope to be able to say, like, you can actually figure this out and do it a way that works for you, and you don't have to feel shameful about that and give up, you know?
Yeah, I mean, how crazy is that too? Like, you're talking about suffering from social anxiety, not being able to speak, not being able to talk out. Now you do a podcast. I mean, that's like, I mean, talk about the growth in that alone. I mean, that's huge.
Right.
You know, that's really one of the things that like I have to pinch myself about today, because it's still not super easy for me. And it's not even just a podcast. Like I speak on public platforms. Last year I did a speech in front of almost 2,000 people, and it was like, no friggin' way would that have ever even been something that I even thought could have been possible even just a few years ago. And so, you know, but like, that's the crazy thing is like, you get into recovery, you start figuring things out about yourself, and little do you know that the things that petrify you the most are the things that could potentially become the most fulfilling in your life. And so it's really, it's really ironic, believe it or not.
Yeah. So Bobby, let's start with you, man. Like, if that's cool. I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, and kind of what your journey, your story is through, some of the crazy times, and then into recovery too.
Yeah. Well, Shane, I didn't start doing drugs until I was, you know, in my late 20s, but I had been in 4 different reform schools from the time I was like 12 years old to 17. I was in trouble. I get in a lot of trouble. I had a chip in my shoulder. You know, I had an old man that used to, you know, pretty much use me for a punching bag. And so going to reform school was like a vacation for me, actually, you know. So, and I got into business at 19 years old. I opened a carpet store. I didn't know anything about carpet. A friend talked me into it. And, 10 years, he bailed out a few weeks later. I didn't know, the back of a carpet from the front. So I called up the distributors, and they sent their reps down. I said, if you teach me about carpet, I'll sell you carpet.
Yeah.
A year later, they were giving me trips to Copenhagen for selling so much carpet. So I was very successul at it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I was one of those guys that started going to Vegas every month, living large, And I got in at 19. I bought my first house at 21. At one time I owned 12 pieces of property before I started, doing coke. And eventually I started doing coke in, it was the late 70s. The coke led to the crack, and that led to the heroin, so I could come down off the coke. And, that went on for a long time. I owned a bar. I started drinking. I wasn't really a drinker. And then I got involved with the wrong people, and I was moving a lot of weight, the coke, back and forth to Florida. I ended up getting busted. I did some time, and I got out, and I got back into the carpet business. And then I slipped again because all my installers were getting high. So the dope was around. I started doing it again. And I reached a point where I actually closed my business after years. I had a very successful business. I closed the doors. I gave all the carpet away. I put up a sign, free carpet. I just couldn't take it anymore. I wanted to get away from all the installers, all I called them nitwits. I'm sorry. I wanted to get away from all of them. They couldn't believe that I was closing the store. I closed the store, gave the carpet away. I became an actor. That's awesome. I get in a movie, The Fighter, and I've done 50, 60 movies since then. I'm actually in Stephen King's series in Castle Rock. And I'm playing a prisoner, believe it or not.
That's perfect.
So, I had slipped quite a few times, and then I eventually got the gag effect with the dope. I mean, you couldn't even talk about dope around me. My stomach would turn. I would just get sick. It was one of those things. I wanted to wake up in the morning and just strangle it. You know what I mean? I hated for what it took away from me. I lost, I lost property. I lost I had 2 boats, 2 condos in Florida. I mean, I had a lot, but it was easy come, easy go. So I was able to hold on to a couple of pieces of property, and thank God I straightened out before I blew those.
Yeah. And so the whole time too, that's going on. You have a family too. I don't know what the age like. So.
I try to keep as much as I could from Maegan. Yeah. But, when you're doing time and she's 5 years old, 4 years, she comes up to visit you and she starts asking you, her mother brings her up and, Dad, what is this place? I tell her it's a forestry camp, we take care of the animals, Yeah. She said, why do they have the barbed wires up on the fence here? I know it's to keep the bears out because there's big bears up here, Maegan. She remembers this story. She told the story recently. She said, well, why do they have guns? I said, for the bears. And she's an animal lover. She says, they don't shoot the bears, do they? I said, no, they just scare them away. Yeah, wow. She remembered that story. She was 5 years old, so. But eventually she caught on and she knew what was going on, But I tried to keep it from her as much as I could,
So what does that transition look like for you as you kind of clean up and make that decision to say I'm leaving that old life behind and I'm moving on to do other things and then maybe you could talk a little bit about the transition and then what's your recovery program and what does that look like for you today?
Well, once I made the decision that was it. It was like an epiphany that one day you said, that's it. I'm done. And inside, I've said it to myself many times, but was never really 100%. But now when that one time came, I don't know, a light bulb went off and I said, that's it. That's it. I started working out. I wanted to get back into shape, which I did in jail. I started getting my health back. And the better, the more I worked out, the better my diet was. I felt so much better that I was actually enjoying. I'd wake up in the morning, looking forward to to the day,
Yeah.
I wasn't waking up with a big head and like feeling like shit. And so I started enjoying life. I started enjoying my family more, and spending more time with them, and life just became so much better. I just can't imagine how how anyone could go back to that old life. I'd shoot myself if I ever went back. Honest to God, I enjoy every single day. Like I said, I became an actor. I found something that I really loved. And like Maegan, years ago, if you put a camera in front of me, I'd run. I was hide. I couldn't speak in front of a camera,
Yeah.
But as I took acting lessons and got used to the camera and got used to being around crowds of people, I became more outgoing, and life just got better and better. And to this day, it still gets better and better every day, So, and watching Maegan's recovery was, that was the ultimate,
Yeah.
I mean.
I think that's maybe a good segue into hearing a little bit about Maegan's story and how she came up through this. And before we go there, though, I have two quick things just so I don't forget. Number one, with the acting thing, I want to point out how amazing it is to find something that you're passionate about in recovery. And a lot of times, it makes us step out of our comfort zone to find it. And just like you're describing with the acting, same thing for me with the podcast. Like, I'm so passionate about doing this stuff. Bobby, you're so passionate about acting. It helps to give us a purpose. It helps us to find something that, it might make us a little bit uncomfortable, a little nervous at times, but we get better at it and better at it when we're doing it. And I know for me this podcast has really, really helped me stay dialed in on my recovery, too, along with doing
Exactly. I know exactly what you're saying, and you're 100% right.
Yeah. And so I always try to encourage people, out there who are going through it. And obviously it takes some time. You got to be patient and stuff, but try to find something that you really, really love to do and that you enjoy to do, and don't have any expectations with it. The shit will come like when you just are doing the next right thing. So, Bobby, man, thank you so much for sharing, a part of your story, man. That's like, it's just crazy, that roller coaster ride, man. And I'm super pumped to hear you doing so well and just have this passion behind acting, and really, really cool, man.
Just find that one thing you love and you'll be all set.
I love it, man. I love it. I couldn't agree more. So Maegan, let's kind of jump over on your side. You kind of see your dad as a kid, in prison, in jail, living kind of this lifestyle that's a little bit, I would say, unpredictable probably. And how does that lead you down your path into addiction and then into recovery?
So the ironic part about all of it is, like, despite the fact that he thought he was pretty effective at hiding it from me, kids know, what I mean? And like in our neighborhood, it's not like, drug addiction and specifically heroin addiction is something foreign. Like, the look, what the eyes look like, the mannerisms, the voice, you just know it when you see it.
Yeah.
And so growing up around that and knowing that that's kind of what was going on, I really developed a hatred for it because I had seen, what it had done to my dad and what it had done to my community. And it just wasn't something that I was interested in. And so that's the ironic part, is like throughout my high school, and my high school was a Catholic high school that got absolutely decimated by the opioid epidemic before anybody even knew what was coming down the pike. I remember being a sophomore and we had the first overdose and everybody was absolutely devastated by it. And then it just never stopped and it was just continuous. And so I remember like dabbling in it in high school. And by dabbling, I mean literally tried it twice. But really just like not understanding what the big hype was and hating everybody that did it, and was like I was like, this is crazy. I would go to parties and everybody would be like fucking zombies, and I remember causing a huge scene at a party one night, like screaming at everybody because I just thought it was ridiculous. And then fast forward till I'm like 20. I link up with this kid who's a friend of a friend, and I always seemed like such a nice guy, and little did I know he was a huge oxy dealer and started supplying me with oxy for free. And when I say literally handed it to me on a platter, I literally mean like broke up lines on a platter
Right.
and handed it to me for free. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was excessive amounts. And around that time, and this was also somebody who was very controlling, very abusive, and really had isolated me from my friends, and I had fallen out with them. And so I really believe that the way in which my OxyContin addiction was ignited was this perfect storm of being isolated from my friends and my family, and being wrapped up with this guy who was controlling me in every sense of the word, and had, including my addiction, and then became my drug dealer.
Wow.
And so that went on for a while. And truthfully, I say it in jest, but I'm very serious about it. One of the best decisions that I ever made at that point was find a new drug dealer, because it literally was my way of breaking ties with this kid and start to maybe figure out a way to like eventually put some sort of plan together to get off of this. And, I was like your typical high functioning addict. Like none of my extended family members knew how bad the problem was. I was able to maintain a job for, long periods of time and kind of hide it.
Yeah.
And, it ended up getting to the point where obviously it just made sense to get heroin because it was cheaper. And then that's when that started. And I just remember like every 3 months, because I just never wanted to be that person. Like my dreams and hopes as a kid was save the world, save the animals, and go to Harvard. Like that was where I was headed. And to have seen where my life went over the course of those 7 years was pretty devastating, because I literally hated the person that I had become. I absolutely hated the skin that I was living in. And so every 3 months I would try to clean up. I would, get Suboxone or methadone off the street. I would taper myself down. I'd always detox myself in my house. And eventually got to the point where I was like, okay, this is 2010. Vivitrol, which is a non-opioid long-acting injectable that blocks any euphoric effects or any effects at all from any opioids, had just been FDA approved for opioid addiction. Nobody had even heard about it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, the drug dealer who was the abusive boyfriend goes on Vivitrol, does fantastic. I show up at his house one day to buy drugs off of him. And he looks awesome, and he's in a great mood, and he lost weight.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And
What
he's
the hell?
rollerblading around the lake, and I'm like, dude,
Wait. Did you just say he was rollerblading?
Yeah, he like lived right near a lake, and he was like going out rollerblading around the lake. And I'm like,
man.
this is a kid that was like nodded out at every point of every day, you know? And now he's like this nice kid. And I'm just like, what is going on? I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, it's this shot, this Vivitrol shot. And he like told me the name of the doctor. And I remember looking it up. And from 2010 to 2012, I described that period as being kind of like this. I had 1 foot in and 1 foot out in my recovery. And I was still trying to negotiate the terms of how I could still maybe use every once in a while and still be okay. And so I got on the Vivitrol shot, and I really wasn't committed. So I'd plan a relapse. I'd wait for the medication to wear off. I'd cancel the appointment and lie and do the whole bit. And that kind of went on for a little bit. And then finally in 2012, I just said, look, you can either commit to this 110% and do it right, or not do it at all. Like, enough of the bullshit. And if you're not going to do it at all, then you will have to accept the fact that you are going to be a drug addict for the rest of your life. And if you have kids, your kids are going to have a mother that's a drug addict, and that's how that's going to impact them. And so that was my biggest fear. And I was starting to get older at this point. I'm like late 20s at this point. And that's when I finally just said, like, I can't go back to that. The whole point in exploring this Vivitrol was to give myself a break of that full-time job of being a drug addict.
Hey, Bobby, did you know all this was going on at the time, or what was your take on this? Was it obvious that
Shane? I kept saying to my wife, I know something's wrong with her. The mood, I know the mood swings and everything. And my wife would say, no, she's studying. She's going for her master's. Bachelor's at the time. And my wife kept making excuses for her. And when I tried to talk to Maegan, it was a battle. I mean, Maegan's, she's a pretty tough for a girl, She was into the kickboxing and everything. And I'm a pretty big guy, but I wouldn't mess with her. So I tried talking to her every chance I got, and that's all I could do, Shane, was try to engage in conversation because I knew what was going on. I came real close to making a terrible mistake once I found out who her boyfriend was.
Yeah.
And I had to really make a decision. Do I, you know what I mean? I want to live my life with the rest of my life with my family. And it was a tough decision for me to make because it would have been very easy for me to go over there and take care of this guy. I mean, I just grew up like that, So,
well, and I don't want to get, Maegan, I don't mean to get you off track, but I just want to point this out real quick. And I wanted to, Bobby, ask you one more question. Like for someone out there who's listening, who might, have a child that's going through that, you've been through it firsthand. Like what kind of advice would you give to somebody who's, or maybe they just have a loved one. And that's one of the hardest things because we know that we can't help somebody who doesn't want to help themselves. It's almost impossible. They have to want to get help. And in a lot of those situations, it's just a really tough thing. So, I mean, what would you say to someone out there? Any advice?
Shane, the one thing I would say is engage in conversation with them as much as you can, for as long as you can, as often as you can, because it's your only hope, to get through. Maybe you'll say something eventually that will penetrate. Yeah. And I didn't believe in the tough love approach with Maegan because I know Maegan's personality and she was very sensitive, and you say the wrong thing, you're going to set her back, So I didn't use that approach. I just try to engage in conversations with her. And that was tough because we made her an apartment upstairs and she could come and go as she pleased, and she avoided me like the plague, So it was an effort for me to try to get her in the right place and sit her down and talk to her. But eventually, it worked, I guess,
And by the way, talk to me about things unrelated to the addiction.
Oh, right.
Not like, shaming me or being punitive, like literally like about the weather, anything.
Yeah. Just trying to
create. The more
you're
talking to them, the more time you spent with them, that's the less time they're out there trying to, cop dope or whatever, So
that's good.
I did it as much as I could, and knock on wood, something worked,
Yeah, I'm sure that's like it's probably heart wrenching too to see I mean, I have kids. My kids are young, 4 and 8, but I if I put myself in your shoes, that's got to be something because that's like I said, it's super, super difficult to deal with. We don't want anything more than to be able to help our kids and give them what they need and be there for them. And, it's got to be tough, man. So I admire that, man, that you kind of hung in there. And I think that's great advice too. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not trying to change you. If you ask for help, absolutely, I'm going to help you, but at least just let me be there for you to love on you. And I think that's the number one thing. And beyond that, Maegan, let's jump back into your story. I can't get this damn vision of the drug dealer rollerblading around the lake out of my head right now. And it's about to make me laugh my ass off. So let me try to X that and, go ahead. Let's jump back on track with your share.
It's a funny sight too because he's like 6'5", on a rollerblade. Like, what? Oh my doing?
Gosh, yeah, that is comedy. and I'm not. I gotta say too, I used to aggressive inline skate. We called it, right? So we skated, and so you aggressive inline skate ramps and all this stuff on rollerblades. So okay, anyways, I'm totally getting off track. Please take it away and let me shut up.
So I think where I left off was like I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I left off with the Vivitrol and kind of having that crossroad of like, all right, am I going to get this together or am I not? And I just finally surrendered. Like I literally was just like, oh my God, it just clicked. I was like, wait a second. So all I have to do is show up every month to get this shot. And once I leave that office, I can go live a life that has nothing to do with this person who I've hated for years, this drug addict. Like I can actually put it behind me. Yeah. And that's how it really felt at the time. And it really, and I just said, wow, that's a relief. Like that is so much easier than having to maintain this daily habit of waking up every morning. And the first thing I have to do is figure out how I'm going to get to the drug dealer and then try to build the rest of my day around that schedule. It was crazy.
Yeah.
So, and the Vivitrol was fantastic because it stopped my cravings. It stopped the racing thoughts and the obsessive thoughts about using, and the research I think is still debatable as to whether or not it does anything in the brain to actually extinguish the cravings, or if it's that you accept the fact that you are probably not breaking through that blocker with an opioid, and so you're not going to use feasibly. That's the goal, right? And if you can follow the program, that's what ends up happening. And so you just kind of like stop thinking about it.
And how long did it take to where, you kind of felt like genuinely free and clear from it? Are we talking months, weeks, like what, years?
Well, I have to say, up until that point, I had never, ever been able to build any evidence for myself to prove that I could actually abstain from opioids.
Yeah.
So it was like the first month, I think it was the second shot when I had gone back and I was like, wait a second, I might be onto something here. And before long, it was like not even quite a year that I had been on the medication and taken it seriously that I started thinking about ways in which I could stimulate my brain again and get myself back into this thing called life. And so I started researching programs to go back to school to study forensic psychology. And I found a master's program of forensic psychology, and I was enrolled I think it was under a year of sobriety.
Really?
Yeah. And then just got rolling and just have not stopped. I literally have not stopped. I finished a master's degree in last summer.
Nice.
I'm now, second year in my doctoral program. So
congratulations. That's freaking awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's good for me because it stimulates my brain. It builds my confidence and self-efficacy that I can actually retain information and that I'm not this damaged person, that my brain can heal. Yeah. And that I can do this,
So how many, or how long of clean and sober do you have? How much time?
This past July was 6 years.
Really?
And,
wow.
Yeah, and 3.5 of those years I was on Vivitrol. So I made a conscious decision to come off of it when I felt like I was in a supportive environment of being in my master's program and knowing that I still had that accountability to go to class and do all my schoolwork so I mean, it's been awesome.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned earlier that's where you met Chris, right? Was in school.
Right.
So take us a little bit through that. Like what was that like? And, maybe you can share a little bit for those out there listening, about what happened.
Yeah, sure. So
can I just say something real quick, Shane? When she got on the Vivitrol, that's when I could relax. And that Vivitrol meant as much to me as it did to her, because now I don't have to worry. I know she's got the blocker. So the parents, it's great for the parents when your kid's on something like that. Now you don't have to. Now you can sleep at night.
Yeah, that's huge.
And actually, it took so much of the pressure off of me of proving to my parents that I wasn't using. They knew I was going for the shot, and that's all that they needed to know to be able to sleep at night. And for me, it was appealing because it wasn't an opioid. I wasn't going to get addicted to it. There wasn't going to be withdrawal when I wanted to come off of it, and that's why that was the only medication that was going to be an option for me.
Is Vivitrol, is it an expensive medicine to get?
So if you don't have insurance, it's about $1,200 a shot,
wow.
which is very high. But I don't know what the insurance plans are like in the rest of the country. I know in Massachusetts, all of the, private companies like Blue Cross and stuff, they all cover it. And so doesn't Mass Health. So
it's kind of funny too. As soon as I asked you that, I kind of almost wanted to punch myself, because it's is Vivitrol expensive? Well, it's is your fucking life expensive? You know what I'm saying? Is your life what is your life worth? What is your, and so, I mean, I don't mean to put a price on it, but I mean, just in a sense, just for somebody out there who might say, well, shit, how do I get that? Do I need insurance? That's kind of where I was going, but I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and think about it. I mean, think about how much you're spending on drugs anyway. I mean,
oh yeah,
the Vivitrol shot. I mean, that's got to be a bargain for most of us.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so that was a big part of it, and then meeting Chris and I was still in the master's program, and he was an incoming student in the doctoral program, and we connected because I started that group, and then I just thought what a cool way. Here we have now. At the time when I met Chris, I was not open about my recovery because here I was as a professional about to become a therapist at the time.
Yeah.
And like self-disclosure is like this big ethical piece of our job, and we're only supposed to disclose, like, like in the forensic world, you disclose nothing. Like you give first name, last initial, that's it, because you're working with an incarcerated population. Maybe there's a risk, maybe there's danger, whatever. So I was petrified. I was absolutely petrified to say, like, oh, I have this deep dark secret in my past that in the academic world is not going to be respected. And so, but I desperately wanted to lend my knowledge and experience. So that's why I started this group. And the whole time Chris is like, he talked about it later, but he had said, maybe Maegan's one of the people that like is a loved one and just like really gets it. But Maegan like really gets it. Like, I don't know, there's something up there. Yeah. So he like had suspicions. And then I asked him to speak on a panel for an event that I was running with some parents that had lost children to overdoses, and my cousin sat on the panel, and the Wahlberg Foundation was a part of it. So James Wahlberg with the film If Only came and spoke, and we showed the film, and it was great. And I watched Chris really just own his experience of being a drug addict and now being in recovery.
Yeah.
And not making any apologies for it. And I was like, my cousin did the same thing. And I was just like, wow, this is really powerful. Like, they can't be that much different from me. And if they can do it, maybe I can at least give it a shot. And that's when I decided to just tell my clinical seminar class that I was in recovery, and that this was the secret that I've been holding on to, and that it was just a relief to be able to speak it to another human being. And that's how it started.
Yeah, that's crazy. So you got a little bit of freedom in being able to open up, start this group, and start talking about not just from the professional perspective, but from your own perspective. And I think that's a huge plus for anybody doing work in that field, is to be able to have that personal experience. At the same time, like you were saying, you got to kind of watch out, because what information you're given, if you're working with people who are incarcerated, or who knows what, who knows who you're working with, I guess at any point, you kind of got to toe that line lightly. And it sounds like that's kind of what you were trying to do.
Yeah, and I didn't want to, I didn't know what the reception was going to be. I didn't want to, ruin my career options, and I didn't know who was going to discriminate against me because of it. And so, but meanwhile, I'm listening to all these professionals on national levels talk about the subject of addiction, and I'm like, but I know that too, and I know that because I was a guinea pig for 7 years. You know what I mean? I didn't know that because I studied this for 10 years in a classroom. Like, I
actually lived it
too. Yeah. And I just felt a little like, well, what the fuck, man? Like, I'm sitting here and doing all this work, and I have to stay quiet about this, and I know 10 times more than you guys, and like, I should be able to say it,
Yeah, I love it.
So really, a lot of my work, I started doing event planning and stuff for these opioid crisis forums that my school holds. Yeah. And I was in contact with a lot of pretty high profile people, and just felt like, okay, I'm like immersed now into it. I've been doing the work, and maybe it's not so scary if I say who I really am. Yeah.
Do you find it hard to separate the work that you do from your personal recovery, or do you have a certain strategy that you use for that?
Well, I mean, we talked about this with Chris's passing. I think the big learning point that we can take from it as budding psychologists in the field is, and whether or not this really played a role in Chris's story, we'll never really know. But I do think it's worth generating a conversation about how self-care is so imperative in us doing this work. So
real quick, because for those out there listening who might not know, I didn't mention this, and I'll maybe kind of let you say it. So Chris and Dave have the Dopey Podcast, which is out of Boston. Just to give a little background here, right? This is how you guys you met Chris through school, and recently Chris passed away just in the last month, I believe, right? I mean, it's not too long ago. And so I don't know the ins and the outs. I was too much of a chicken shit to listen to the actual episode. My mom listened to it, and she filled me in on some of the details, but I don't know how deep you want to go into that, or if you even just want to mention it or whatever. I just wanted to give a little background before we go any further. Yeah.
So Chris and Dave host the Dopey Podcast, and Chris is a Boston dude, but Dave is New York, and Chris would go out to New York to record. So they're really kind of like New York based, I guess I would say. But Chris had a gnarly history of addiction, like, I don't know, something like 11 treatment facilities, early onset with the drinking and crack cocaine and that sort of thing, like, 15 and maybe even earlier. But had finally put some time together and got himself into this program and thought that maybe his life experience would do him some good in trying to help people that had lived a similar life as his, and was doing great and was, part of a 12-step community and was really committed to it. And for whatever reason, and there are different theories as to like what actually precipitated, the whole situation and the relapse and all of that. But he stopped going to meetings. He was stressed out with school and his workload. And I think thought that doing the treatment that he was doing with clients, working at a substance abuse treatment facility and then doing the podcast, I think he started to take that for granted a little bit and started to not be as diligent about his recovery, and then couple that with an injury that prevented him from working out, which was a big release for him. Who knows what the thought process was that ignited that. But whatever happened, he relapsed. He was fighting with his girlfriend. The night before he passed away, he got into a fight with her and like basically told her to leave. And she was like, I can't fight with you anymore. Like, I'm just going to stay at my family's house. And so she left, and I think at that point, people were concerned about him and thought maybe something was up. Yeah. And I know he was on the phone with Dave until like 6:30 that morning.
Oh, wow.
And Dave had been checking on him. And I know Chris's girlfriend was concerned about him. So that's why Dave was staying in contact. And heard from him at 6:30 and then got a call at like 10 that he had passed. Wow. And
that fast, just all of a sudden.
That. Yep, it was that bad.
And thank you for sharing that and giving giving myself and those out there listening a little background who might have not known. And that kind of brings us back, I think, to the original question that I had asked is, how do you separate your personal recovery from if you're working in an environment and working with other people. And I mean, I guess that can even go for sponsors too, or who are sponsoring guys. How do we kind of separate those? I mean, what do you have a strategy that you use? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's never really like a big deal to me unless I have a client with like almost identical profile as me. So like, 30 something female, history of opioid addiction, and now like in a graduate program, which I've had clients like that before. And it definitely brings up some shit.
Yeah.
And so I think, here's the thing is like, we don't get into this field to be clinicians or, offer ourselves as sponsors because, we're just Joe Schmo off the street, cookie cutter, fucking vanilla. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we're called wounded healers for a reason. And that's why we gravitate towards the helping field, is because we have the lived experience and it kind of speaks to us in a different way. And so all the reason more why we should be taking care of ourselves and making sure that we have those outlets, whatever it be, and it doesn't even mean that you have to be somebody in recovery. It's even more the reason why we need to remain diligent. But most of us in this field have some sort of personal history. It could be an eating disorder. It could be depression. It could be bipolar. It could be whatever.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's imperative that I disconnect from the technology, that I'm not responding to emails. Just because somebody sends one doesn't mean I have to respond right away. Going for hikes, making sure I'm getting out into nature. Like I did 2 trips this summer to Acadia National Park and to the White Mountains. Like that's the type of shit that I need. I need to know that the world is much bigger than me and there's a much bigger purpose out there for why we do what we do and to get out of that narcissistic, hamster wheel that we get stuck in the society, and like the small shit like that upsets us on a day-to-day, like it just doesn't matter when you get out into a mountain that's, bigger than you could ever imagine,
Yeah. No, yeah, I love it. And that, you're really describing just that self-care piece and finding something that you enjoy to do, getting out in nature. For me, it's backpacking. I love taking a couple of backpacking trips a year, hiking, jogging, that kind of stuff, getting my blood flowing and getting out there and actually doing something. It's something that's huge. It's a release. Even just walking, like I love waking up early in the morning and grabbing a cup of coffee and walking the dog. You know what I mean? Just walk, just getting rolling for the morning, get my mind going, some prayers, some meditation. That self-care stuff is just absolutely huge.
And actually speaking just meditation real quick. I mean, I was fortunate enough in therapy, like I just believe, and it's not because I'm a therapist, it's because I really believe that as human beings, we're very complicated. And in order for us to present our best selves to the world and to have the best impact on people that we can, we got to do soul searching, and we got to dig deep, and we got to find out why it is that we're fucked up. And we got to do the best we can to try to heal those parts of our psyche that, you know, made us do the shit that we did. And so I've been fortunate enough to be working with a therapist, this particular therapist, for the past year, where I do heart chakra meditation, which is really about, you know, digging into that piece of my soul that allows me to have self-compassion for myself, of course, but also to have compassion for other people and to just not react to things the way that I maybe once did. And so that's been hugely instrumental.
Yeah. What's it called again? Heart shock?
It's heart chakra. Yeah. It's not a type of meditation that most people do.
Yeah. I don't think I've heard of it. So what is it? Can you explain it a little bit? That sounds really interesting.
Yeah. So really what it is like, it's not a cognitive type of meditation. It's really like an emotional type. So I may take a situation that has been triggering for me over the past week, like maybe somebody said something that was upsetting. You know, and my therapist will sit there and process it with me and figure out, you know, at what point in my life did I experience something that might be triggered by this instance, you know?
Yeah.
So we try to trace that back, and we look at like my whole history, my childhood. Okay, well, this represents, you know, that instability in your family when you were a child and didn't feel like maybe people were in control. And so therefore you stepped up to take control of the situation at a time when you didn't have the skills to do it. Okay, so that makes sense as to why I'm a control freak and I want to control the things around me. So we start to dig into that stuff and really tap into your own vulnerability. And so you sit there with the meditation and we call it, you know, you drop into the heart center. And you really just like, what I do is I envision this ray of light going between my heart and the person's heart whom I might be having an issue with. And I sit through it and I sit with it and I allow those feelings of anxiety or whatever comes up to pass. And eventually that image of that person starts to take on a new shape and a new meaning. And it really just like transforms the way in which you perceive a situation. And you begin to understand that it's your own vulnerability that was triggered by that person and really has nothing to do with them, but really a lot to do with what's ever coming up for you. And that's where you begin to do the work.
Yeah, that is really, really cool. And it's crazy how much personal responsibility is involved in something like that, because it's easy to point the finger. Like my counselor would always say in rehab, he would say, you know, that old classic line, like every time you point the finger, there's, you know, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. And it's like, where's my place in this? How do even if it's something that was bad that happened as, you know, maybe as a kid that you really don't have control over, you know, in some way there is your part in that somehow. And it's like, how do you look at that, you know? And so meditation, I don't know if maybe I've just haven't heard it, the way you kind of put it before, say it again, shock heart or heart shock. Yeah.
So there's like 7 different chakras. There's like the root chakra and the sacral chakra and all these things. This one is the heart chakra.
Okay. Okay. I got you now. Yeah. So when you said drop into the heart, I know I've kind of heard that, and I'm kind of new to the whole meditation. I don't know, probably in the last maybe year or so. And, it's just been really eye-opening for me. You know what I mean? And, it's been a great way to kind of start the day, a little meditation, prayer. And I always thought meditation was this weird thing where you sat and like hummed and stuff. You know, a lot of people I think that, and it's totally not, you know, and like when I finally like was like, man, get your head out of your ass, like start, you know, learning a little bit, man, it's been a really, really cool thing. And thank you for sharing that too. You know, I'm going to look into it a little bit more myself.
Definitely. And like I use it, you know, I'll use it now. I'll be, you know, ready to go up to speak at a big convention or a speech or whatever. And my nerves will start to get going and I'll start to think about like, well, what is it that I'm afraid of? Like, what could possibly happen up here that would be so bad? And so I imagine like, you know, somebody judging me. And so I sit there and I sit maybe 15, 20, 30 seconds before I have to go up and I get into my zone. And like I said, I drop into the heart center and I really start to have compassion for myself that everything is going to be okay. And that and that I'm worthy, and that,
good.
no one's going to hate me for this. And even if I bomb up here, there's still something meaningful that I can take from this experience. And so you're 100% right. The work in which my therapist does with me is very much, what is your role in this universe? How is it? What do you put out into the world that brings these certain energies towards you? And what role do you play in that? And how can you work on it?
Yeah, that's so good. I love that you said, a couple of good things, but one that really stands out is I am worthy. Like, how hard is that sometimes, especially going up in front of a crowd of people? There's nerves, there's, all kinds of stuff going on emotionally. You're trying to make sure that you're on point on whatever you're going to talk about. At the same time, a lot of those insecurities can come creeping back in if we don't know how to handle them. And so through training, through practice and stuff, that's kind of where this stuff comes in. And the worthiness, I mean, that's a huge thing, able to flip it and get some positive spin on it. Well, I'm looking at the clock here, and I think we got a couple of minutes left. Let's try to wrap this thing up right now.
Sure.
I want to get your guys's, both your takes. I mean, to anyone out there listening, who might be new to recovery, or they have someone who's struggling out there, any advice, any words of insight, anything you could share that might help somebody?
Oh man. I mean, if I could bottle up what I've done in my recovery and just give it to somebody, I totally would, because it goes far beyond just stopping the drugs and stopping the substance. It really goes, and that's what you never ever expect to do. When somebody tells you got to clean up and get off drugs, and you do take it one day at a time in the beginning, but man, would I love to be able to give somebody a tangible object, something where they can really see what life could be like in 5-6 years from that starting point. And to really not be afraid to go deep, soul search, do whatever it is that you have to do. And the way that I say it is like, repair the holes in your soul that led you to the addiction in the first place. Like, really get to it and try to be the best person that you could be, and realize that you have a potential here that you have not even met yet because of the drugs, and like, give yourself the chance to actually meet yourself, Yeah,
that's good. How about for you, Bobby?
Shane, I say, and I know it's easier said than done, find that one thing that you really love to do, and you'll be all set. And some people, they ask, well, how do I find that? And I say to them, well, what is the one thing that you would be willing to do every day? Get up first thing in the morning and do every day, and enjoy it, and not get paid for it, and do it for free. And really have a good time at it, and look forward to waking up the next day to do it again for free. And I found it in acting, because I've worked so many sets, so many hours for Zip on these independent films, and look forward to waking up the next day and putting in another 15 hours and so on, and the next day. And sometimes it's right under your nose. Just figure out what you would be willing to do for free, and do it every day, and take money out of the equation, and you do it every day, and really enjoy it. And if you find it, and sometimes it's right under your nose. What do you like for hobbies? So that's I don't know. That's the best thing I can give.
I love it, man. I love it.
One more thing, Shane. I just want to add one more thing. So one of the big things that I attribute to being able to like build the confidence in myself and really get settled in my recovery was just believing in what we call neuroplasticity, which is that the brain can heal. There are new neural pathways that fire every time we engage in a behavior that we haven't done yet, and that excites us, which is the reason why it's imperative to try new things in recovery, so you can figure out what it is that you like and what it is that stimulates your brain. And the other part is that I've always had mental health issues, depression and anxiety and all those things underlying, beneath the addiction. And psychiatric medications just never spoke to me. And so I've been able to explore ways to manage that stuff through things like amino acids and supplements and alternative stuff. And that's, not the answer for everybody. And some people are going to hear that and say, that's, a bunch of quacky, whatever. But it has literally changed my life in the knowledge that I have about the ways in which amino acids can help manage our moods. It's been instrumental. And so I encourage anybody to do some research and to find some sort of pathway that speaks to you, and to not be afraid to ask the questions, and to bring it to your doctor, and find the resources. They're out there.
Yeah, that's good stuff right there. I mean, stepping out a little bit, getting a little uncomfortable, and finding some new opportunities and new ways, something that we haven't tried before, so I love it. I want to mention one thing too real quick. I saw on your website, the Addictionarypodcast.com, right? I got that correct, right? The Addictionarypodcast.com. Okay, cool. Yeah. So if you guys want to check out the website, you can go there. I'll put that in the show notes. What I also saw there that I wanted to mention was the 5K race in honor of Chris. And so I saw there's a 5K race coming up. It says in Chris's honor for the Shatterproof Rise Up Against Addiction on September 23rd in Boston. And you can donate to the Addictionary Podcast team, or you can register. And I'll put the link for that in the show notes. And of course, you can go to the Addictionarypodcast.com, and the info's on there too. The last or next thing too, we got to do Seth and I want to come out to Boston. We got to do a live show sometime. I mean, that'd be so legit. We're going to do this one in Petaluma. Yeah. In September. And we're kind of going to get our, we'll get the first one out of the way and get any of the kinks out and have some fun and kind of see how that works. And then, maybe we can talk about that later. I think that'd be a great thing to do.
Sounds great. I love it.
The recovery community out in Boston is pretty solid, so you'd be very welcomed here.
Oh, I bet. I've always wanted to come to Boston. I've still never been able to go. I'll have to go when Oakland's out there so we can go to Fenway and watch a little baseball. That would be the best.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, man.
It'd be awesome. I love it. Yeah. Definitely.
Watch the Red Sox kick some ass.
Man, they're absolutely crushing it right now. I can't believe it.
Yeah.
They are. They're on fire. And the A's, the A's are doing damn good too. I just went to a game last week, and I think they were playing Seattle. And we had a good time. I love some baseball, and it's great being sober at the game too. I get to remember the game. I don't spend a shitload of money anymore. So good stuff. Right. Thank you guys both for coming on, for taking some time. I greatly appreciate it. Good luck with everything, with the Addictionary Podcast, with school, with acting, all that good stuff. I love it. Thank you for your inspiration and sharing all that good stuff. I really appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
You keep up the good work.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you have any questions, you need some help, you can always call Foundations Recovery Network. They have a private line. It's 877-714-1318. Shout out to Azure Acres. They're invited me back to Circle Around to speak this weekend. So I'm really pumped about that. Thank you to them. And then once again, thanks to our sponsors, Sober Nation Foundations, Humans. And we love you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Peace, love, respect, and keep your blood clean.